The desert stretched endlessly under the pale shimmer of a crescent moon. Sand dunes rippled like waves frozen in time, their curves whispering secrets to the wind. The air was cool but carried a dry, electric charge, the kind that prickled the skin and made every breath feel heavier. Lucas stared out at the horizon, leaning against the rusted frame of his pickup truck, his mind lost in thought. The solitude of the desert had always comforted him, a refuge from the noise of the city. Out here, there were no glowing screens, no blaring horns, no endless chatter. Just silence and stars. But tonight, that silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive. The wind shifted suddenly, brushing against Lucas's face like a whisper. He straightened, his hand instinctively dropping to the knife strapped to his belt. The desert wasn't supposed to feel like this. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting. Then he saw her. At first, she was just a figure in the distance, barely visible under the moonlight. A woman, standing still at the edge of the dunes. Her silhouette was graceful, unmoving, like a statue carved from shadow and starlight. Lucas blinked, unsure if she was real or some trick of the desert's endless mirages. But when she moved, stepping slowly toward him, he knew she was no mirage. The woman was tall, her figure draped in a shimmering metallic dress that clung to her body, catching the faint light with every step. Her hair, long and silver white, cascaded down her back, glowing softly like strands of silk spun for moonbeams. Her skin had a luminous quality, smooth and pale, as if untouched by time or weather. Lucas couldn't look away. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing across the desert. "Are you lost?" The woman stopped a few paces away from him, tilting her head slightly. Her eyes locked onto his, and Lucas felt his breath catch in his throat. Her eyes weren't normal, they shimmered like pools of liquid silver, reflecting the stars above. There was something ancient in her gaze, something that made him feel small, insignificant. "I am not lost," she said softly, her voice carrying a melodic lilt, like the hum of distant music. "I've come to find you." Lucas frowned, his grip tightening on the handle of his knife. He didn't like how her words sounded, too deliberate, too intimate. Like she already knew him. "What do you mean, you've come to find me?" he asked, forcing himself to sound steady. The woman smiled, a slow, serene curve of her lips. There was no threat in her expression, only calm curiosity. Yet that calmness made Lucas uneasy. It was the kind of calm that came from someone in complete control. "Your name is Lucas," she said, stepping closer. Her bare feet moved soundlessly across the sand, as if the earth itself welcomed her touch. "You live in the city, but you come here to escape. To be alone." Lucas stiffened. "How do you know that?" "I know many things," she replied. Her voice was soft, but her words carried weight. "I know you carry pain in your heart. I know you feel out of place among your own kind." Lucas's heart thudded painfully in his chest. There was no way she could know that. No way she could know about the loneliness he carried, the hollow ache that never seemed to fade. "You've been watching me," he demanded, his voice harder now. "Who are you?" The woman's smile widened, but there was a sadness in her eyes now, a distant sorrow that made Lucas hesitate. "I am Saria," she said. "And I've been waiting for you." Lucas took a step back, his boots crunching on the sand. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to put as much distance as possible between himself and this strange, beautiful woman who seemed to know too much. But he didn't run. There was something about Saria that pulled him in, a magnetic force he couldn't explain. Her presence was both comforting and unnerving, like standing on the edge of a cliff, mesmerized by the drop. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Saria's gaze softened. "I want to show you something." Lucas shook his head. "I don't think." "Please." Her voice was almost a whisper, carrying a plea that tugged at something deep inside him. "It's important." Lucas hesitated. He should walk away. Drive back to the city and forget he ever saw her. But the look in her eyes stopped him. There was a sadness there, a loneliness that mirrored his own. "Where?" he asked, his voice rough. Saria reached out, her fingers brushing against his wrist. Her touch was cool, almost electric, sending a shiver down his spine. "My home," she said softly. "Come with me." Lucas stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He didn't trust her. How could he? She was a stranger, an otherworldly stranger, at that. But there was something about her touch, her voice, that made him want to follow. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "Lead the way." Saria smiled again, a soft, grateful smile that made Lucas's chest tighten. As they walked across the dunes, the moonlight seemed to follow them, casting an ethereal glow over the sand. The silence of the desert returned, but now it felt different. It wasn't oppressive anymore, it was charged with anticipation, as if the very earth was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. Lucas glanced at Saria, watching the way her dress shimmered in the moonlight, the way her hair flowed like liquid silver with each step. "Who are you?" he wondered. "And why do I feel like my life will never be the same after tonight?" The wind whispered through the dunes, carrying with it a single haunting thought. You should have walked away. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of sand and starlight. As Lucas walked behind Saria, the silence between them grew heavier. He watched her movements carefully, the way her dress shimmered like molten silver, the way her bare feet never seemed to disturb the sand beneath them. Something about her felt unnatural. She moved too smoothly, too gracefully, as if gravity itself bent to her will. And yet, despite every warning bell ringing in his mind, Lucas couldn't stop following her. The moon hung low in the sky, casting faint shadows across the dunes. The air was cool, but Lucas felt a bead of sweat slide down the back of his neck. His heartbeat thrummed in his ears, drowning out the quiet crunch of his boots on the sand. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking toward something he wouldn't be able to walk away from. "Where is your home?" he asked, breaking the silence. Saria glanced over her shoulder, her silver eyes catching the light like twin mirrors. "Not far." Her answer was vague, but her voice held a soothing quality that made it hard to press further. There was something melodic about the way she spoke, each word flowing into the next like a song only she could hear. Lucas frowned. "There's nothing out here. Just sand." "You'd be surprised," she said softly. "There are things hidden in the desert. Things your people have forgotten." Her words sent a chill down his spine, but he tried to brush it off. He wasn't here for cryptic riddles, he needed answers. "How do you know me?" he demanded, his voice sharper now. "You said you've been waiting for me." "Why?" Saria stopped walking. The sudden stillness caught Lucas off guard. She turned slowly to face him, her expression calm but unreadable. The desert wind stirred her hair, making it shimmer like moonlight. "I've seen you," she said quietly. "In dreams. In visions." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "That doesn't make any sense." "It doesn't have to," Saria replied. "Some things are beyond logic, beyond reason. Some things are simply meant to be." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lucas wanted to argue, to demand more concrete answers, but something in her gaze stopped him. There was a quiet sadness there, a depth of emotion he couldn't quite understand. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly, taking a step closer. "The pull. The connection." Lucas swallowed hard. He did feel it, a strange magnetic pull that he couldn't explain. It wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper, something primal. Like a thread woven between them, drawing him closer despite the fear coiling in his chest. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, taking a step back. Saria tilted her head, studying him. "You're afraid." "Of course I'm afraid," he snapped. "You show up out of nowhere, talking about visions and fate. You know things about me you shouldn't know. And now you want me to follow you to some mysterious home?" "Yeah, I'm a little afraid." Her expression softened. "I don't want to scare you, Lucas. I only want to show you the truth." "What truth?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the horizon. "There are things you don't know about yourself. Things you've forgotten." Lucas's chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" Saria reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist again. The touch was cool, sending a shiver up his spine. "Come with me," she whispered, "and you'll understand." They walked in silence for what felt like hours. The desert landscape never seemed to change, just endless dunes and starry skies. But Lucas noticed subtle differences. The air felt thicker, charged with energy. The stars above seemed brighter, more vibrant, as if they were drawing closer. Finally, Saria stopped at the base of a large dune. "We're here," she said. Lucas looked around, confused. There was nothing but sand. "This is your home?" he asked, skepticism creeping into his voice. Saria smiled faintly. "It's hidden. Come." She knelt down, placing her hand on the sand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the ground beneath them began to shift. The sand parted like water, revealing a dark, spiraling entrance that seemed to descend into the earth. Lucas stared in disbelief. "What the hell?" Saria stood, brushing sand from her hands. "It's safe." "Safe?" Lucas repeated, his voice incredulous. "You expect me to climb down into some underground lair and believe it's safe?" Saria's gaze was steady. "You've already come this far. If you turn back now, you'll never know the truth." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to get in his truck and drive as far from this place as possible. But something held him there. Curiosity. Or maybe it was something deeper, a need to understand why he felt this strange connection to her. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "Fine. Let's go." Saria's smile was soft, almost grateful. She turned and began to descend into the darkness, her movements graceful and fluid. Lucas hesitated at the edge of the entrance, peering into the abyss below. The air that rose from the tunnel was cool, tinged with a faint metallic scent. His fingers tightened around the handle of his knife. "What the hell am I doing?" Taking a deep breath, he followed her. The tunnel was narrow and winding, the walls smooth and cool to the touch. Bioluminescent markings glowed faintly along the walls, casting an eerie blue light. The deeper they went, the more Lucas's unease grew. "This place," he murmured. "It's not human." "No," Saria agreed. "It's not." Lucas glanced at her. "Then what is it?" Saria didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was distant, lost in thought. "This is where I was born," she said softly. "Where my kind came into being." Lucas's mind reeled. Her kind. "What are you?" he whispered. Saria stopped walking, turning to face him. Her silver eyes seemed to pierce through him, seeing every thought, every fear. "I am not like you," she said. "But I am not so different either." Lucas shook his head. "That doesn't answer my question." "There are things your people have forgotten," Saria said. "Things buried in the sands of time. We were here long before you. And now we are dying." Her words hung in the air, heavy with sorrow. "Why are you telling me this?" Lucas asked. "Because you can help us," Saria said. "You can save us." Lucas took a step back. "I don't even know who you are. Why would I help you?" Saria's gaze softened. "Because you were meant to." Lucas's chest tightened. He didn't understand what she meant, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her, the strange connection that had drawn him here. "Please," Saria whispered. "Let me show you." Before Lucas could respond, the walls of the tunnel began to hum. The glowing markings brightened, casting the space in a brilliant blue light. Lucas's heart pounded as he realized they were no longer alone. Something was waking up. The hum reverberated through the narrow tunnel, a low, pulsating sound that Lucas could feel in his chest. It wasn't mechanical, it was alive. The bioluminescent symbols along the walls pulsed in time with the sound, glowing brighter with each passing second. The light bathed Saria's face in a ghostly blue hue, highlighting the unearthly beauty of her features. Lucas's pulse quickened. His grip on the knife handle tightened. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Saria didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed ahead, her expression unreadable. There was a solemnity in her posture, a reverence, as if she were standing at the threshold of something sacred. "They're waking up," she said softly. "They?" Lucas's voice sharpened. "Who's waking up?" Saria turned to him, her silver eyes reflecting the glowing symbols. "My people." A shiver ran down Lucas's spine. The air in the tunnel felt heavier now, charged with an energy that made his skin tingle. He glanced down the corridor, where the light grew brighter with each pulse. "This was a mistake," he muttered. "I shouldn't have come here." Saria stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "You feel it, don't you? The connection." Lucas clenched his jaw. I feel a lot of things right now. Fear. Confusion. Maybe even a little regret. Her lips curved into a faint smile. You're afraid because you don't understand. But soon you will. Before Lucas could respond, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The room was immense, carved from the rock itself. The ceiling arched high above, adorned with more glowing symbols that stretched like constellations across the stone. The walls shimmered with veins of silver, catching the light and creating an otherworldly glow. But it wasn't the architecture that made Lucas's breath catch in his throat. It was the pods. Dozens of them lined the chamber, each one an elongated, translucent cocoon filled with a thick, bluish liquid. Inside, he could see humanoid figures suspended in stasis. Their forms were similar to Saria's, tall, elegant, with silver hair and luminous skin. But there was something unsettling about them. Their eyes were closed, their expressions serene, but their presence felt ancient, powerful. "What is this?" Lucas asked, his voice echoing through the chamber. Saria walked slowly between the pods, her fingers trailing along the smooth surface of one. "Our sanctuary. Our last refuge." Lucas followed her, his gaze darting between the pods. "You said your people were dying." Saria nodded. "We are the last of our kind. We've been asleep for centuries, waiting for the right moment to wake. And now is the right moment?" Lucas asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Saria turned to him, her expression grave. "Because of you." Lucas froze. "What do you mean, because of me?" Saria approached him slowly, her eyes locked onto his. "Your kind has forgotten the old ways, the old bonds. But you carry their memory. It's in your blood." "My blood?" Lucas shook his head. "You're talking like I'm some kind of chosen one. I'm just a guy. I don't even know why I'm here." Saria reached out, her fingers brushing against his cheek. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through him, making his skin tingle. "You're here because you were meant to be," she whispered. "You carry the connection we need. The bond that can save us." Lucas took a step back, his heart racing. "What bond?" Saria lowered her hand, her gaze never leaving his. "Long ago, our two species were one. We lived in harmony, sharing knowledge, sharing life. But over time, your people forgot us. They turned to science, to technology, and abandoned the old ways. The bond between us was broken." Lucas swallowed hard. "And now you want to, what? Rebuild that bond?" "Yes," Saria said softly. "But it's more than that." Her gaze intensified, filled with a strange mix of hope and desperation. "We need to survive," she continued. "We need to continue. And to do that, we need you." Lucas felt his stomach twist. The implications of her words were sinking in, and they weren't sitting well. "You need me, to what?" "Help you repopulate?" he asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Saria's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes, an emotion she hadn't shown before. "Yes," she said simply. "Our species must continue. And you are the key." Lucas took another step back, his mind racing. This wasn't what he had expected. He had followed her out of curiosity, maybe even a strange attraction. But now, he felt like a pawn in a game he didn't understand. "This is insane," he muttered. "You're talking about using me like some kind of breeding stock." Saria's gaze softened. "It's not just about survival. It's about connection. About restoring what was lost." Lucas shook his head. "I don't even know you." "You will," Saria said gently. "In time." The hum in the chamber grew louder, the light from the pods intensifying. Lucas glanced around, watching as the figures inside began to stir. Their eyes fluttered open, revealing the same silver irises as Saria's. They were waking up. Panic set in. Lucas turned to Saria, his voice rising. "I can't do this. I'm not some savior. I'm not some chosen one." Saria stepped closer, her expression unwavering. "You are more than you know, Lucas. You carry the legacy of our bond. And now, you have a choice." "What choice?" he demanded. "To help us," Saria said softly. "Or to walk away." Lucas stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. fear, curiosity, a strange, inexplicable pull toward her and her people. But deep down, one thought echoed louder than the rest. You should have walked away when you had the chance. The hum grew deafening, the pods glowing like beacons in the dark. The figures inside were waking, their eyes locked on Lucas with a quiet intensity. His heart pounded in his chest. "What happens if I say no?" he whispered. Saria's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Then we fade. And so does the bond." Lucas swallowed hard, his throat dry. He was standing at a crossroads, and every instinct told him that whatever choice he made would change his life forever. And somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "You were never meant to walk away." The hum of the awakening pods reverberated through the cavern like a low chant, vibrating in Lucas's chest. The glowing symbols along the walls pulsed in rhythm with the sound, creating the unsettling sensation that the chamber itself was alive, watching, waiting. The figures inside the pod stirred, their movements slow and fluid, like creatures waking from a deep slumber. Their silver eyes fluttered open, fixing on Lucas with a quiet, unsettling intensity. Lucas's heart raced. He took an involuntary step back, his hand tightening around the knife at his belt. What are they looking at?" he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his own fear. "They see you," Saria said softly. She stood beside him, her gaze serene, almost reverent. "They feel the bond." Lucas's skin prickled. There was that word again, bond. It sounded ancient, sacred, and suffocating all at once. "I don't understand," he muttered. "Why me? What bond?" Saria turned to face him fully. Her expression was calm, but her eyes shimmered with unspoken emotion, hope, desperation, longing. "Our species was never meant to exist alone," she said. "We were always meant to share life, to intertwine with yours. That bond is what kept us alive, what allowed us to flourish. But when your people forgot us, the bond broke, and we began to fade." Lucas shook his head. "You keep saying that. Bond this, bond that. What does it actually mean?" Saria stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. Lucas felt the air grow heavier around him, charged with that same strange energy that seemed to radiate from her very presence. "It means we need you," she said softly. "To survive. To continue." Lucas's stomach twisted. He already knew what she was asking of him, but he needed to hear it aloud, to confront the full weight of what she wanted. "You're talking about breeding," he said, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. Saria didn't flinch. "Yes." Lucas let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "This is insane. You can't just pull someone out of their life and expect them to—" "I didn't pull you out of your life," Saria interrupted, her voice steady. "You came here. You felt the call, even if you didn't understand it. Something inside you led you to me." Lucas stared at her, his heart pounding. He wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong. But deep down, he couldn't. There had been something, an inexplicable pull that had driven him to the desert, to this moment. But that didn't mean he was ready to accept what she was asking. "This isn't right," he said, shaking his head. I'm not some chosen one. I'm just a guy." "You are more than you know," Saria said softly. "You carry the memory of our bond in your blood. It's why you feel this connection to me. It's why you're here." Lucas's mind raced, every thought tangled in fear and confusion. He glanced at the awakening figures in the pods, their silver eyes watching him with silent expectation. "What happens if I say no?" he asked quietly. Saria's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of sadness in her gaze. "Then we die." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Lucas felt the weight of them settle on his chest, pressing down on him like an invisible hand. "All of you," he whispered. Saria nodded. "We've waited too long. Our bodies are failing. If the bond isn't restored, we won't survive another cycle." Lucas rubbed a hand over his face, trying to process everything. He was just a man with a simple, quiet life. How had he ended up here, standing at the edge of an alien extinction? "I don't even know if I can do what you're asking," he said, his voice strained. "This is all too much." Saria reached out, her fingers brushing against his wrist again. Her touch was cool, soothing, like a balm against his racing thoughts. "You're afraid," she said gently. I understand. But you're stronger than you realize. Lucas looked down at her hand on his wrist, feeling the pull of her presence, the same pull that had brought him here in the first place. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was deeper, more primal. Like a memory buried in his bones, calling out to be remembered. I don't want to be forced into this, he said quietly. You're not being forced, Saria replied. The choice is yours. It always has been. Lucas's gaze met hers, searching for any sign of deceit. But all he saw was honesty, raw, painful honesty. Why me? He asked again. Saria smiled faintly. Because you carry the spark of what we lost. You are a bridge between our worlds. A reminder that we were never meant to be alone. Lucas exhaled slowly, his mind still spinning. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss he couldn't see the bottom of. And yet, he couldn't turn away. The hum of the chamber grew louder, resonating in Lucas's bones. The figures in the pods were fully awake now, their silver eyes glowing softly in the dim light. One of them stepped out of his pod, his movements slow and graceful. His gaze locked onto Lucas, and for a moment, Lucas felt like he was staring into a mirror of another life, another version of himself. The alien man nodded once, a silent gesture of acknowledgement. Lucas swallowed hard. What happens now? Saria stepped beside him, her gaze soft but steady. Now you decide. Lucas glanced around the chamber, at the glowing symbols, the awakened beings, and Saria herself. He had come here seeking solitude, seeking escape from the chaos of his life. But instead, he had found something far greater, a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but one he couldn't ignore. The weight of their gaze pressed down on him, and somewhere deep inside, he felt a whisper. This is where you were meant to be. Lucas clenched his fists, his mind torn between fear and something deeper, a flicker of purpose. I don't know if I can do this, he murmured. Saria's hand rested on his shoulder, grounding him. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing. Lucas closed his eyes, taking a steadying breath. The air in the chamber was cool, but his skin prickled with energy. When he opened his eyes, his decision was made. I'll help you, he said quietly. Saria's gaze softened, her lips curving into a gentle smile. Thank you. The other beings in the chamber bowed their heads in silent acknowledgement, their eyes glowing brighter. Lucas felt the weight of his choice settle on him, heavier than anything he'd ever carried. But alongside the fear, there was something else. Hope. Lucas followed Saria deeper into the cavernous tunnels, the bioluminescent symbols glowing brighter with each step. The hum of the awakened beings echoed behind them, creating a haunting chorus that seemed to vibrate through the stone walls. His mind raced with unanswered questions. Every instinct told him to turn back, to run. But something kept him moving forward. Curiosity. Obligation. Or was it the connection he felt to Saria, a pull that defied logic? Where are we going? He asked, his voice echoing in the narrow passage. Saria glanced over her shoulder, her silver eyes glowing softly in the dim light. To the Hall of Memories. Lucas frowned. The what? You need to see for yourself, she said. To understand who we are, and who you are. Her cryptic words only added to his growing unease. He glanced at the walls, tracing the glowing symbols with his eyes. They pulsed like veins, carrying light through the stone like blood through a living body. You keep talking about this bond, Lucas said. About how I'm connected to you. But you still haven't explained why. Saria paused at a large archway carved into the rock. The symbols along the arch glowed brighter, illuminating the entrance to a vast chamber beyond. You carry the spark of the ancients, Saria said softly. A legacy passed down through generations of your people. It's why you feel the pull. It's why you're here. Lucas crossed his arms, his gaze skeptical. And you expect me to believe that? Saria smiled faintly. You don't have to believe me. The truth is in the hall. With that, she stepped through the archway, disappearing into the chamber. Lucas hesitated for a moment before following her. The Hall of Memories was unlike anything Lucas had ever seen. The chamber stretched endlessly, its walls lined with tall, crystalline pillars. Each pillar shimmered with a soft blue light, and within each one, Lucas could see images, moving scenes, like memories preserved in glass. He approached the nearest pillar, peering into its depths. The image inside flickered to life, showing a scene from a distant past. A man stood on a lush green hillside, his face turned toward the sky. His features were strikingly familiar: dark hair, strong jawline, eyes filled with quiet determination. But what caught Lucas's attention was the woman standing beside him. It was Saria. Lucas stumbled back, his heart pounding. What the hell? Saria appeared beside him, her expression serene. That's not me. It's one of my ancestors. But Lucas pointed at the man in the image. He looks like me. Saria nodded. He was one of the first. A human who formed the bond with our people. Together, they created something new. Something powerful. Lucas's mind reeled. The image shifted, showing the man and Saria's ancestor standing before a gathering of beings, alien and human, united as one. We thrived, Saria continued. For centuries, our bond kept us strong. But when your people turned away from us, we began to fade. Lucas turned to her, his eyes narrowing. So, what? You expect me to pick up where he left off? Saria's gaze softened. It's more than that. You carry his bloodline. You are a descendant of the first bond. Lucas shook his head. That's impossible. Is it? Saria asked quietly. Have you never felt different? Like you didn't belong? Her words struck a nerve. Lucas clenched his jaw, memories flashing through his mind. Moments of isolation, of feeling out of place in a world that never seemed to understand him. He glanced back at the image in the pillar. The man's eyes met his own, and for a moment, it felt like looking into a mirror. Lucas turned away, his thoughts swirling. So, what happens now? You expect me to start a new bond? To rebuild your species? Saria nodded. Yes. And what if I refuse? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. If you refuse, Saria said softly, we die. Lucas's chest tightened. The weight of her words pressed down on him, but something about her calm demeanor unsettled him. You keep saying that, he said. But why do I get the feeling there's more to it? Saria's expression flickered, just for a moment. A crack in her serene mask. There is more, she admitted. Lucas stepped closer, his gaze sharp. Then tell me. Saria hesitated, her silver eyes meeting his. The bond isn't just about survival. It's about transformation. Lucas frowned. What does that mean? Saria's gaze shifted to the pillars around them. Our people cannot reproduce on their own anymore. Our bodies have changed. We need human hosts to carry the next generation. Lucas's blood ran cold. Hosts. Saria nodded. The bond allows for a merging of our essences. But it requires a physical vessel. Without it, our species cannot continue. Lucas took a step back, his heart pounding. You're talking about using humans as incubators. Saria's expression remained calm. It's the only way. No, Lucas said, shaking his head. That's not survival. That's invasion. It's not invasion, Saria said gently. It's evolution. Lucas's mind raced. He thought back to the strange pull he felt toward Saria, the way her touch had affected him. It wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper. Something he couldn't explain. And now, he understood why. You've been manipulating me, he said, his voice cold. Since the moment I met you. Saria's gaze didn't waver. I've only shown you the truth. The truth. Lucas barked a bitter laugh. The truth is, you need me to sacrifice my life to save your people. Saria stepped closer, her voice soft. You were always meant to be part of this. It's in your blood. In your destiny. Lucas's hands trembled. The weight of her words pressed down on him, suffocating him. No, he whispered. I won't do it. Saria's expression remained calm, but her eyes shimmered with sadness. You don't have a choice. Lucas's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Saria raised her hand, and the glowing symbols along the walls pulsed brighter. The hum in the chamber grew louder, resonating through Lucas's bones. We've already begun, Saria said softly. The bond is forming. You can't stop it. Lucas stumbled back, panic setting in. His pulse raced, his breath coming in short gasps. You lied to me, he said, his voice trembling. You said I had a choice. Saria's gaze softened. I never said the choice was yours. Lucas stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat of panic. The glowing symbols on the walls pulsed brighter, casting the cavern in an eerie blue light. The hum of the awakened beings filled the air, growing louder, more insistent, like a chorus calling out to him. His mind raced, trying to make sense of Saria's words. We've already begun. The bond. The transformation. It was happening, and he hadn't even realized it. You lied to me, Lucas hissed, his voice trembling with anger and fear. You said I had a choice. Saria took a step closer, her silver eyes filled with sorrow and something deeper, regret, perhaps. I never meant to hurt you, Lucas. But some things are inevitable. No, Lucas snapped, shaking his head. Nothing about this is inevitable. I'm not some pawn in your plan. I won't be used. He turned, ready to run, ready to escape this nightmare, but the moment he moved, the ground beneath him shifted. The crystalline pillars lining the hall pulsed with light, their glow intensifying until they formed a barrier of shimmering energy, trapping him inside. There's nowhere to go, Saria said softly. The bond is already in you. You've felt it since the moment we met. Lucas clutched his chest, his breathing ragged. He had felt it, that inexplicable pull toward her, that connection he couldn't shake. But now he realized it wasn't just emotional. It was physical. His veins burned beneath his skin, a strange warmth spreading through his body. He stumbled to his knees, gasping for air as his heart pounded erratically. What's happening to me? He choked out. Saria knelt beside him, her expression gentle. The transformation has begun. Your body is adapting, preparing to carry our essence. Lucas's eyes widened in horror. No, I didn't agree to this. You didn't need to, Saria said quietly. The bond is older than both of us. It's written into your very being. Lucas gritted his teeth, fighting the overwhelming sensation coursing through him. His vision blurred, flickering between reality and strange, alien images, flashes of Saria's people, their history, their fall. He saw the first bond formed centuries ago, saw human and alien intertwined in ways that defied explanation. But he also saw the darker side. The sacrifice. The loss of autonomy. The submission. No, he growled, forcing himself to his feet. I won't let this happen. Saria rose with him, her gaze calm but unyielding. You can't fight it, Lucas. The bond is already in you. It's part of who you are. Lucas took a shaky step back, his mind racing for a way out. He couldn't let them take control. He couldn't let himself be consumed by this alien force. And then he remembered the knife. His hand dropped to his belt, fingers closing around the hilt. He pulled it free, the blade gleaming in the pale light. Saria's eyes flicked to the knife, her expression momentarily faltering. You won't hurt me. Lucas tightened his grip. I'll do whatever it takes to stop this. You don't understand, Saria said, her voice softening. The bond isn't just about us. It's about saving both our species. Without it, your world will fall too. Lucas frowned. What are you talking about? Saria stepped closer, her gaze filled with urgency. Our worlds are connected. The bond between us stabilizes both. Without it, your world will descend into chaos. You've already seen the signs: natural disasters, instability, the breakdown of life as you know it. It's all connected. Lucas hesitated, doubt creeping into his mind. Could she be telling the truth? Was this bond really the key to saving his world? Or was it just another manipulation? I don't believe you, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Saria placed her hand over his, gently lowering the knife. You do believe me. You've felt it. Deep down, you've always known you were meant for something more. Lucas's heart pounded as her words echoed in his mind. He thought of the life he'd left behind, the loneliness, the isolation, the feeling that he didn't belong. And now, here he was, standing at the crossroads of fate. Was this his purpose? Was he truly meant to save both their species? For a long moment, he stood frozen, torn between fear and destiny. Then, slowly, he lowered the knife. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered. Saria's gaze softened. "You don't have to do it alone." The chamber grew quiet, the hum fading to a soft, steady pulse. The beings in the pods watched in silence, their silver eyes glowing with quiet anticipation. Lucas felt the warmth in his veins subside, replaced by a strange sense of peace. The pull toward Saria was still there, but it no longer felt like an invasion. It felt natural. He met Saria's gaze, his voice steady. "What happens next?" Saria smiled, a genuine, grateful smile that lit up her entire face. "We rebuild. Together." Lucas nodded slowly, his mind still processing everything. There was no turning back now. The bond was part of him, and he couldn't deny it any longer. But as they turned to leave the Hall of Memories, a flicker of doubt remained in the back of Lucas's mind. Had he made the right choice? Or had he just sealed his fate? Epilogue: The New Dawn. Months passed. The desert shimmered under a golden sunrise, the air filled with the hum of new life. Saria's people walked among the dunes, their once fading forms restored to vitality. The bond had saved them, just as she had promised. Lucas stood at the edge of the dunes, watching the horizon with quiet contemplation. His body felt different now, stronger, more connected to the world around him. But there was still a lingering unease in his heart. He turned as Saria approached, her silver hair glinting in the sunlight. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. Lucas hesitated before answering. "I don't know." Saria reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You've given us a future. That's something to be proud of." Lucas nodded, though the doubt remained. As they stood together, a figure appeared on the horizon, a lone traveler, making their way toward the settlement. Lucas frowned. "Who's that?" Saria's expression darkened slightly. "Another." "Another what?" Saria squeezed his hand. "Another bond." Lucas's chest tightened as realization dawned. It wasn't just him. They were expanding. And this time, there would be no turning back.